About 10 years ago, a British software design entrepreneur and environmentalist called Greg Jackson spent some time analysing the global energy supply sector to try to understand why it was moving so catastrophically slowly towards the green transition that we all nowadays understand to be crucial to our sustainable future on this planet. What that analysis revealed was a group of lumbering incumbent behemoths with outdated technologies and monopolistic market mechanisms that effectively removed any urgency to innovate or improve. So Greg decided it was time to disrupt that comfortable status quo and shake things up a bit. He and his team used their enterprise software design expertise to create a digital platform that put end customers like you and me right at the heart of every decision made by its mind-blowingly sophisticated algorithms. The result was an ultra-efficient, extremely agile, customer-focused program called Kraken that seamlessly linked together every aspect of energy supply management, customer liaison and billing, and all the other operational functions that would be required by a green energy supplier of the future. Unsurprisingly, the incumbent operators weren't all that interested in changing, so Jackson co-founded a small company to demonstrate how Kraken could improve the operations of a typical energy business. That small company, called Octopus Energy, did quite well. In fact, in just 8 years, it's grown into the UK's largest electricity supplier with a valuation of over £6 billion, and Kraken is now contracted to 54 million accounts across 17 countries, including the United States. Not a bad start, eh? But you should see what this business maverick plans to do next. Hello, and welcome to Just Have a Think. If you're a UK resident, there's a fair chance you're already getting your home energy from Octopus. If you're outside the UK, then you've probably never heard of the company, and you might be wondering why this video is relevant to you. But stay tuned, because although Octopus might not be providing your home energy in the future, the Kraken platform may well become the backbone of your utility company's operations sooner than you think. We'll come back to that at the end of the video, but first of all, it's probably worth taking a look at how Kraken works and why it's apparently so superior to anything else currently available. Essentially, it's a cloud-based operating system that uses machine learning, generative AI and data to automate the entire energy supply chain. Because all the information about each customer is held in a single data set within Kraken, you and I get a seamless customer experience all the way from registration and authentication, right through to billing, notifications and customer relations management. Here's Greg Jackson himself during a recent podcast.
So look, I mean, Kraken's designed to be able to support almost any utility in almost any geography. And it's especially good at handling the world of renewables, forecasting the generation for each of those generating points, forecasting the amount of battery available necessary in each electric car, monitoring every heat pump and understanding the thermodynamics of the home it's in so that it can optimize the heat pump against renewables. Look, Kraken processes, just for Octopus Energy in the UK, billions of data points per day to optimize this new world. What was really special was in Kraken, we could do this far more completely than most, because Kraken had the entire statement history, the meter reading history, the payment history. It had every email in and out, every phone call transcribed both ways. It had the entire history all in one data set for every customer.
I was lucky enough to visit Greg at his Octopus head office in central London recently, where he gave me a tour of the facility and touched on one or two of the key outputs of the Kraken platform.
I think when President Kennedy announced that America was going to send someone to the moon by 1969, no one knew how they'd achieve it,
No.
But by having that focus, they delivered it. We do know how we can achieve 2030 net zero or zero carbon electricity, but what it takes is focus. So we know that through wind and solar, interconnectors, grid level storage, dramatically more EVs and heat pumps, we can create this system. This is Fan Club, where you get cheap electricity when it's windy.
Oh, right. Fan Club, love the name.
You come across this?
Yeah.
So we run this thing called Fan Club. A limited number of turbines we have, where if you live near the turbine, you get cheap electricity when it's windy.
Right.
20% off when it's windy, 50% when it's very windy. The reason we did that was we wanted to see if we could encourage people to use electricity at the times the turbine was turning, because that way you need less storage and less transmission, less grid, because it's getting used locally at that time.
Yeah.
And we found that people do indeed, like, they'll do their washing or other discretionary tasks.
Yeah.
When it's windy. And it's not like you need to check an app. You can tell, you look out the window, right?
But this is what's really cool, community interest. So when we announced the fan club, i.e. cheap electricity when it's windy, 26,000 individuals and communities got in touch wanting turbines near them. And then adding on landowners. So we've got all these landowners who want turbines.
Right.
And then mapping where we think we can get grid connections quickly. So you'll see the grid situation with sort of the green means availability. So click on that and you'll see, there's 11 megawatts of headroom. So we can think about how to...
What can you do there?
Yeah, exactly. You've got a landowner, you've got a community, and you've got grid.
And then there's all this kerfuffle about their newfangled electric vehicles, isn't there? Astonishingly, we're still seeing some elements of the press and social media trying to suggest that a move to EVs is not the right direction for the automotive market. But on top of the obvious benefits of a vastly superior driving experience, far lower maintenance and running costs, and a significant carbon reduction, even in countries still running coal-dominant grids, electric vehicles are also already playing a key role in grid flexibility, as Jackson explained.
Using electric car batteries is an incredible way of balancing the grid.
Yeah.
Well, because today, Octopus alone has 1.066 gigawatts. So over a gigawatt of electric vehicles that we charge with a bespoke schedule for each vehicle every day.
Right.
Designed to do this exact job of balancing the grid.
Yeah.
It allows us to grab the cheapest electricity, often when it's windy or sunny or when the grid is underutilized, and charge the cars at those times. Drivers on these products can do 100 miles for £2.40.
Yeah,
That's
amazing.
7 times cheaper than petrol or diesel.
Yeah.
Right? But they're also helping bring the cost of electricity down for everyone else because they're helping balance the grid and soaking up this cheap electricity when it's abundant.
Right.
Using less when it's in tight supply, which means that for everyone else who's using it at those times, there's less demand.
And even if you're away from home, the Kraken platform coordinates hundreds of public charging networks into a single app to make sure you always have access to electrons when you're on the road, and often at preferential rates.
Here's all the charge points on Electroverse in the UK. And so you've got the real-time availability and pricing of all of the charge points. Here we go. This is where you get special offers, like loads of cheap offers, a bit like the time use we do at home.
Yes, yeah.
With Electroverse, we negotiated time of use for out of home as well with some of the operators. So when the electricity system is cheap, your charging's cheap. And the idea is that, we found 40% of charging shifted when we did that. Yeah, that's Electroverse. So it's not just the UK.
Not content with simply providing the electricity though, Jackson and his team are investing heavily in hardware as well. They recognise the slow pace of heat pump adoption here in the UK and have set out to fix that problem too.
And the more we looked at heat pumps, the more it was clear they were the answer.
Yeah.
This magical thing that they use 1 unit of electricity to create 3 or more units of heat is magic. In Michael Dell, the guy behind Dell Computing, he was in his dorm room doing his MBA when he read that an IBM PC that costs $3,000 to buy only costs $1,000 to make.
Right.
And that's when he created what he called the direct model, right? And literally set up their own manufacturing and ship direct.
Okay.
Removing a lot of the costs in wholesale and distribution and stuff like that. And that's why we basically bought our own heat pump manufacturer.
Right.
And then developed our own heat pumps. But within that, it gave us the opportunity to move to higher temperature heat pumps. And so the Octopus Cozy 6 will run it up to about 75 degrees C. Now in doing so, it might be, 10% less efficient than a 40 degrees C heat pump or a 45 degrees C heat pump. But it will mean that you don't need any new infrastructure in your home. If your gas boiler worked, this can be a plug and play replacement.
Indeed.
And therefore the upfront savings in changing your home, avoiding changing your home, far outweigh the sort of 10% extra you might be paying on electricity.
Despite these very significant technological breakthroughs and market disruptions, a rapid transition is still being severely hampered by the same familiar old roadblocks of bureaucracy, regulation and legislation.
The main things we need to do are very rapidly reform our planning system so we can build infrastructure. It doesn't take long to build wind farms.
No.
And solar. It takes a long time to get the permission. Government have made really welcome announcements on that. Then we need reform of the way you get a grid connection. The queue to get a grid connection is still often well over a decade long. You can't hit a 2030 target if it's going to take 13 years to connect a solar farm, which is what we currently face for one of our plans in Durham.
Yeah.
And the third thing we're going to need is to reform the electricity market, because if we're going to put all this renewable onto the system, we've got to make sure that it brings bills down. And in our current perverse market, there's no guarantee that, in fact, renewables could put bills up in our current market if we don't reform the system.
One of the key elements of those reforms, in Greg Jackson's view, will be the introduction of regional pricing to replace the current system we have today that was designed for a very small number of very large centralised power producers.
Very precise, the way it works currently is every half hour, National Grid holds an auction. And anybody who wants to generate electricity and sell it into the grid states their price. National Grid then look at all of those bids, and they cut off the price, which will give them enough electricity to fill the grid.
Yeah.
And every generator gets that price. So what that means is that if you've got, for example, a supply constraint in the southeast of England, that might set the entire national price for that half hour, pushing it high. But if it's windy at that point in Scotland, there'll be so much electricity that they turn off the wind farms and pay them to turn off. But the high national price means that, for example, people at the other end of an interconnector can make money by selling into the UK. And so if we broke it up into regions, instead of the entire price being set every half hour nationally, each region will be set each half hour.
Yeah.
So you imagine that in each half hour, the region that's currently the most expensive would still be that price.
Right.
But every other region will be cheaper.
Yeah.
And that's why we know that the modelling shows that if we did this, every region will be cheaper than it is today. Scotland will be the cheapest in Europe. Many other regions, Northern England, Wales, the West, the East, would be dramatically cheaper.
And then, of course, all these new projects actually need to get connected up to the grid, which is another area desperately in need of reform.
It's not about National Grid themselves. It's the system of governance, which is set in regulation, legislation, and it's quite bureaucratic. It was defined at a time when we used to build one new power station every 5 years or something, right? And it didn't anticipate a world in which we were going to be building an entirely new electricity system and all that additional infrastructure. And so the process for reviewing and then connecting was never designed to handle the volume we have today. But the problem is, because each person's position in the queue is valuable, they don't like the queue jumping, right? And that means that a job that is a project that might be fully funded, the money's in the bank, all of the other paperwork's been done, it's ready to go, might be sitting way back in the queue behind projects where they don't have the finance or for other reasons they're not ready to go. But if we were to try and help them jump the queue, then you risk legal action from the ones in front.
Right.
And so it really does need some strong leadership.
So with a new Labour government here in the UK, the hope is that these regulatory and legislative barriers will be overcome in the coming years. But what about across the pond in the good old US of A? If you're watching this video on the day of publication, then there's just 2 days to go until the US election. So how's that going to work out for a platform like Kraken then?
Look, I think I now spend a lot of time in America.
Right.
There's incredible interest specifically in Kraken.
Right.
Because I think American utilities run differently than energy is in the UK and Europe.
Yeah.
In the UK and Europe, you choose your energy company.
Yeah.
And that creates this kind of competitive pressure for energy companies to use technology to bring people different ways of using electricity, preferably ways which are cheaper. So in the UK, we've seen this explosion really in smart tariffs. And so, but one of the challenges they face now is a lot of them have got emissions goals, carbon goals, set by the state or others, and they've got to move to more renewables.
Yeah.
A lot of them are facing a move to renewables because they're cheaper. And so they have a competitive generation market. And so renewable generators will be springing up with cheap power, but of course power that has a different characteristic. And then they really face the pressure from things like AI data centers, even more than you see in other geographies, because the US is really home to some of these hyperscalers. And so a lot of those US utilities are now talking to us about how they can use Kraken to more intelligently manage this much more complex world that they've now got.
Do you know, I think dear old Bobby Kennedy summed up our current situation quite neatly way back in 1966.
There is a Chinese curse which says, "May he live in interesting times." Like it or not, we live in interesting times.
Anyway, that's it for this week. Thanks as always to the amazing folks who support my work via Patreon. Don't forget to jump over to patreon.com/justhavathink to have a look at all the exclusive perks you can enjoy there. And if you found this video useful and informative, then you can hugely support me absolutely for free by hitting the like and subscribe buttons on YouTube and clicking on all notifications. Doesn't cost a penny to do that. It's just a simple click away, either down there or on that icon there. As always, thanks very much for watching. Have a great week, and remember to just have a think. See you next week.